Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. Now, first thing I have to do is apologize. We've had a kind of a long layoff. Things have been very crazy, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. So this episode with Edye Edens was actually recorded back in September, so it's been quite some time. I apologize for it being so late, but I'm ready to start busting out some new content for the community here. So here we go. As I mentioned, our guest today, her name is Edye Edens. She's a licensed attorney with the International Human Rights, Research Ethics, and Health Law background. She spent almost a decade in-house with an academic medical research center. And really, the lady's been all over the place, as you'll find out in this interview. So just sit back and relax and enjoy Edye Edens. All right, Edye, thank you so much for coming on. It's I know we've gone back and forth. I had to cancel on you once, so I'm very glad you're here.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Like I told you, I think that that's one of those, you got time back. The universe gave you some time back on your calendar that day, and you just roll with it. We all need grace all the time, but in 2020, we could use an extra dose.
Yeah, I think we're all going through our own craziness, regardless of the...
Well, now we're trying to restart, right? In all these various phases and capacities, and it's not a full blown, I don't know that we're ever going back to quote unquote, pre-COVID times. And so that has its own implications. Plus our industry, of course, is on fire. Not that you would think it would be anything else, as my healthcare family always never hesitate to remind me, hospitals don't take holidays. There's no such thing in a hospital. And they're right. But now clinical trials are on the evening news every single night. CNN has, 87 reports a day on the race to a vaccine. And so, our whole lives have kind of been blown up if you're in this world in one way or another, in some capacity. And so I think there's an extra layer for those of us in the industry of exhaustion and knowing that the fight is nowhere near over, right? Like you don't even have time to be exhausted at this point.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's still not clear to me whether the, focus on clinical trials is now a good or a bad thing, or just sort of a double-edged sword.
I couldn't say enough about what you just said. Seriously, it in the beginning, I was so pumped. I used to actually make the joke. So my husband's an actuary. And when you say that to people, they're quite often like, well, that sounds cool. What the heck is that? And so, as I'm sure you've experienced when you try to relay to individuals in passing who aren't going to be intimate members of your inner circle, what you do in clinical research, it's hard. It's really hard. And when you're an attorney in clinical research who focuses on compliance, it gets way weedier and nerdier, right? And so there was this part of it in the beginning when I looked at my husband and I said, haha, all our friends know what I do now and they still have no clue what you do. And kind of giggled about it, and really I had family and friends reaching out to me and saying like, wow, like this is the world you're in. This is so cool. Now, fast forward 6 months, ask me if I still feel that way. It doesn't bother me to have the scrutiny, because I think, my goodness, how much scrutiny and what kind of pressure cooker we frankly already had in our industry. So that's not news, right? Like, and handling incredibly time-sensitive life or death matters in the field of healthcare is, in fact, a daily situation. So this is not something we cannot rise to the occasion for. But having it happen at a time where we are experiencing it globally as opposed to just domestically, so you have all these varied response variables, then you also have social media and visibility the way it is in our day and age, which is completely different than the last time we dealt with anything like this. So you have several agencies in play, several laws, several different countries, several responses. You have complete visibility and scrutiny. And then let's throw in, just for fun, in the United States, that we also have a very serious, systemic racial conversation happening. And I'll leave that at that, because I know that's a very controversial issue for many.
Sure.
And then, of course, in that same vein, a topic that I will just park in the garage here, but is worth noting, is, of course, it's an election year, a very highly contested election year for us in the United States. And so that is just, to me, you talk about the perfect of all storms, because now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if we approve something too soon, if we don't have enough diversity focus, if we have any major like serious adverse events, like we just saw in the AstraZeneca trial that caused pause,
Right.
if due to any political pressures or a lack of impartiality, we make a mistake in what we approve because we're trying under such scrutiny and such media blitz pressure and with such political undertones to get this moving so fast, what will the backlash of that be? And you suddenly have, and I'd be interested to hear how you feel about this, but you suddenly have all these individuals who pre-COVID were really not a part of the clinical trial ecosystem. They didn't impact it. They didn't speak on it. It wasn't a value to them. It wasn't something that was in their, stump speech. It wasn't, right. And now it's on everyone's purview. And it's a bit scary to me to have individuals who might otherwise be relatively unfamiliar with our industry, the way it works, the historical underpinnings of some of our regulatory infrastructure, the actual day-to-day boots on the ground, right? Operations of research and what's realistic and what's not, what's safe and what's not.
Sure.
That scares me that those individuals might have a particular influence or say on how quickly we approve something or how quickly we move something forward, and that there could be something besides science behind it in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And B, the downstream effects may or may not actually be played out on that person or that community. It will be you and I who were in this industry pre-COVID and are likely to be after COVID who will ultimately pay that price. And even more than you and I, the patients, right? Because and that just terrifies me because it's like it's this opportunity to advance us 30 years or set us back 30 years all in the same moment. So no pressure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's we pray that we're not, repeating some of the terrible history, that we all are aware of in clinical trials, and all personal opinions aside. I mean, it's on one hand fascinating to see it actually play out on such a big scale and see how it interweaves through all these things, whether it be, political and social issues, that are going on now. So in one ways, it's sort of, I don't know, gratifying, I guess, to see the true impact it has. But, on the other hand, it's also, like you said, it's frightening to know that people who maybe have really no concept, buy-in, or idea about what they're talking about having a large effect on the outcome.
Right. And it's also, I think, really a strange time for those of us who have been in the industry and come from such data and scientific driven backgrounds, whether that's in our education and training, whether it's how we implement our operations and our policies, whether it's our role in the industry. And right now, a lot of the decisions that we're making aren't based entirely on science. And that's not a cut at political, issues. What I mean when I say that is you have to factor in more than just science.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And this implicit belief by clinical research professionals that science is real and that it's not up for debate is step one, right? Us recognizing that outside of our individual industry, there is a growing ethos that does not blindly accept that and wants to seek out multiple sources and wants to vet and verify and makes their own decisions potentially about what in fact is real to them as science and what they're going to stand behind. And that's, I think, contrary to how many of us in research are just wired.
Sure, right.
Right? Like just who we are. Like, it's, I don't know if you're a Big Bang Theory watcher, but my partner always says to me that I have Sheldon broken face sometimes. Like you'll explain something to me and I'm like, no, what, how do you, right. But that doesn't, no. So, I don't understand that line of thinking, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that doesn't mean it's not valid. And then you layer on top of it, I mean, I don't care how smart you are and how incredibly well-versed you are in vaccine research and virology. I mean, this is new. This is different.
Right,
None of us have a playbook for this. Whether you're in the C-suite or you're in the lab, nobody had a playbook for COVID. Okay. We still don't. We're still all working a bit on the fly here. And then you also have the litigious world we live in. And it's not lost on me as a licensed attorney that many of these decisions are very much based on, okay, maybe the science says I could potentially open my doors to in-person classes for my kindergartners
Right.
this year. Just throwing that out there because, young kids in daycare are on my mind as a parent. But the reality is, if everyone else in your area isn't doing that, if that's not what your quote unquote industry practice is right now, even if the science suggests it's okay under certain conditions,
Right.
you probably didn't move forward with that.
Right.
Because you could get sued. And who on earth wants to be the facility, the organization, the hospital, the school, et cetera, that open their doors too soon?
Right.
Hindsight's always, 2020. But realistically, seriously, who wants to be the person who opened their doors, and then a disaster happens? That has complete awful written all over it. Nobody wants to be that. And so now there's just all these other pieces and variables in the pot, no longer just, cooking the chicken. It's like the chicken and the vegetables and the fruit and the dessert all got thrown in, and you're trying to go, wait,
Right.
I just wanted to have chicken. That's all I was looking for. And for those of us who are really good at making our chicken, but admittedly, we've gotten to operate with just chicken, maybe some vegetables. This is new. This is really eye-opening. And so it's really interesting. I think it's like you said, it's really interesting. I'm super curious to see data captures and metrics and statistics as we progress and actually have had enough time to have enough data to really start to learn what's working, what's not. My hope is that we'll start to maybe go away from panic and a little bit closer to, science again. But like I said, there's still political and industry pressures to do things a certain way. And certain folks are going to go back sooner than others, and certain things are going to be acceptable for one that's not for another. I also think there's a personal dynamic. Like, when was the last time, you had to respect anyone, whether personal or professional, any vendor, any service provider, even just a friend or a coworker, when they said, I'm not comfortable coming back.
Sure.
I would like to remain remote. I'm at high risk. Someone in my home has been exposed. We've never had to deal with that on literally a situation to situational basis in our lives, in a way where we just have to respect. If you have someone who says, I'm not comfortable, you actually have to deal with that. We're not, I mean, I guess you don't. Be a real jerk and be like, you're going to come to the office or I'm going to fire you. But I would suggest not working for that organization. Easy for me to say, but realistically though, seriously, that's a huge change in the ethos of your companies and your cultures, how research is being conducted, which places can actually keep it moving during COVID and which just had to say, I'm sorry, we have to suspend trials for a while. And how that played out.
Sure.
That's actually super interesting to me. Right. So I'm thinking about this from the angle of your huge power players in clinical research, the quote unquote traditional research model, right? That is major hospital systems, academic medical centers, universities tied in, et cetera. Those are a lot of the ones that really had to shut down, honestly.
That's true.
Like, they have too many people on campus, too large an operation to just go, well, only this department could come in, it's way too big. And they're not, and they'll tell you this, I'm not dinging on them. They're not well known for moving quickly.
Right.
They're not highly flexible, lean, tech forward organizations in terms of operations and management. And so, and they got too many people to take chances. And so, they just said remote, boom, March 15th, boom. And they sent their students home, they sent their staff home. And so that's a far cry from your leaner based sites that are based out of a community physician practice. Maybe it's a commercial site, maybe it's a startup or a biotech or a site network who frankly already did remote assessments and were already working, as much as they were allowed to, in some of these virtual modalities, right? Sure. Well, they had to obviously get over the speed bump in the spring of being shut down. Once they got their wits about them, they kept going. And so for the first time, I think I venture to say forever, although I don't like absolutes as an attorney. But the first time in, we'll say, a real darn long time, the big players in our industry in the throes of COVID actually had to say, sorry, pause button. And the little guys, right, were the ones who said, or the medium guys are the ones who are going, we can make this happen. Give us a week.
Right.
Let us work with some home health services. Let us get some vendors in place. Let us get, IP set up to ship to patients' homes. Let us set, and just pivoted in this way that the larger organizations knew they might not be able to and just didn't attempt to in certain spaces.
Sure.
And again, I get why. If I was at one of those larger organizations, I would have said the same darn thing. But it just was a complete role reversal. And it's created a whole different power dynamic to me in the industry. I think you would have seen in the next 5 to 7 years, some of those individuals become players and bigger players because they do offer so much flexibility, because they are recruiting at higher percentage rates, because they go so above and beyond, right?
Sure.
To not lose a participant. And they really will come to your home if you need, if that is what it takes to keep you on trial.
Sure.
And you just can't do that at those huge centers. But it was just, it expedited it. Instead of it happening like in 2025 or 2027, it's here now. And I'm actually seeing from my client book, and I'll work with, any and all and have the unique privilege to, but it has been my smaller to medium-sized clients in those spaces who my phone was ringing off the hook in the spring and the summer, because they're going, we got to move and we got to move fast.
Sure.
Tell us what you think. And those are also some of the most exciting, but also some of the scariest conversations, right? Because I'm like, I don't know. There's no rules.
Right. Yeah.
Unlike everything else in my life where there's, a rule, a regulation, a manual, a best practice, an FDA guidance document, some case law, something. I mean, this really was like uncharted waters. But I also saw the passion. And the fact that they're like, I'm not letting my patient come off something that could be meaningful to their therapy. I don't want to lose the data integrity. And frankly, I don't want to lose the business, right? Let's be honest. It's
Sure.
a business too. And so it was just this moment that was so empowering to that part of our industry. And that is, all the good, all the bad. I really want to see that stick, man. I want to see it stick in a way that very much greases the wheels for your larger systems to begin heading that way. No one expects your larger systems to be nearly as lean and flexible as these other types of sites. They're just a different type. But I do think we could be doing things a little bit more efficiently, right? Like we could be doing things a little bit smarter instead of harder. And so that's my hope, is that will kind of have a really positive effect across the industry of seeing just what you can do if you really put your mind to it and your resources to it. And frankly, how cost efficiently some of them are doing it, because, a lot of your smaller sites are on a pretty tight budget. There's not a lot of room for error there. And I hope the message it will send to sponsors is that, we should be going to every different type of site for research. I mean, I understand the minutia implications, of course. Certain therapeutic areas are stronger in certain types of research entities. Fair enough.
Sure.
You don't find a lot of phase 1 programs outside of some of your larger entities. And there's good reason.
Right.
That. Like, got it. But just globally, very, very 500,000 foot level, I would really like to see the takeaway be here that there's just as much value in us having a site in a community-based physician practice or a lean site network as there is doing our research at the heavy hitters out there, the Mayo, the Johns Hopkins, right? The Dana-Farbers, that they hold equal value and should be equally considered. I also think that's a road to cleaning up our diversity issues in clinical research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because man, those leaner, smaller, medium-sized guys, they are the ones who are going to reach populations that huge hub model just struggles to reach, whether it's for socioeconomic implications, because people can't take a week off work and go to the big city, every time something's going on, whether it's just at a community level, having certain focus or certain community ties and conversations that really empower certain populations that otherwise get a little bit wallpapered in, right?
Sure.
To come out and to speak up and to say, well, if you restructured it this way, or if you did it this way, we would become a part of this, or we would be a part of this. And to show what can come from that, because it's going to take a lot of positive reinforcement and seeing what it can do before it will become commonplace. And we certainly, with what's going on in the United States, in terms of our social issues and our conversation on race, are aware. I think we're awake. I just pray every night that we're listening. But I think that does create a unique opportunity for us in clinical research to say, my gosh, if COVID's going to upend how we go about doing research, or all the different ways that we make available to people to participate in research, why wouldn't we go all the way and make some change then to diversity while we're at it? If you're already taking a top-down approach and making some drastic changes to an industry, wouldn't you just go ahead and go all the way? Like, let's not halfway go. You don't want to yank the parachute out like 100 feet, take it off 100 feet before you hit the ground. That's kind of not worth it.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe I'm out there, but I definitely, those have been my takeaways from the year. Very big picture of, where we're at, and frankly, where we got to get in this industry. And of course, all of that takes a backseat to people are dying from COVID. This is serious.
Right.
This is really freaking serious. There's no doubt about that. And it's a darn scary time. It's hard to get away from. Everyone's operating on COVID fatigue, and yet we're more needed and more desired than we've ever been. I mean, we are on demand, and we are, like I said earlier, highly visible. So I think we've got a good another 12 months at this intensity level. I know everyone I say that to is probably just cringing in their chair a little bit. But I just don't see how we get to next summer not still being pretty much on full tilt. Even if we're able to accomplish some vaccine drops, which I hope are very meaningful and helpful and come along much faster than many of us in the industry anticipated actually coming along in a truly, effective manner that's safe and meaningful for all involved. I still don't see how on earth we're coming off full tilt until next summer. And I think that's probably honestly optimistic, because I can't swallow saying like 2023.
Right. Right.
I just think we have some time to go. I mean, if we're being really honest, we do, right? Like,
no, I agree 100%. Yeah. No, I don't think I would not even venture to make a guess as to when, this will start to stabilize a little bit at this point. I mean, I sure as hell don't think it's going to be beyond the end of this year, but beyond that, I'm not even going to wager a guess.
Yeah, I think, I also think there's some notion that we're all going to just like forget this ever happened and go back to a pre-COVID world. And I think that's not a little, it's a lot unrealistic. I mean, there are some ways, and I'm always about finding the silver lining in crappy things and crappy moments of, we have learned some jobs could go remote, and some people enjoy working remotely, or new ways to work through different problems. Or, like I was saying, some of my more lean, pivoting clients have really figured out just how much they can do in the home and how virtual they can go. And that's opening up whole new therapeutic trial areas for them. So there's a whole lot of good in being in this pressure cooker for, at least the rest of the calendar year, if not possibly a few more.
Sure.
But man, it's hard. It's really, really, really hard. And the toll that that's taking on people, and obviously the mental health and wellness that comes with all of us having restricted social activities, that's pretty darn tough too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
I sure hope people, that's how I like to think of it. 100%. But yeah, no, I could talk about this for days. I mean, just because there's so many different angles and viewpoints, and that's before you even get into the actual science, right? Of the research of COVID. And then of course, there's a whole world of science and research on issues of race and inequality that also are a huge conversation piece right now.
Sure.
And that cross our divide. And so, man, what a year.
Yeah,
what a year. Woo! What a year.
Time. What a time to be doing what we're doing. I mean, couldn't ask for a more interesting time.
Well, that's why I keep telling, I in addition to consulting, my other career as I teach, and I'm certainly not a tenured faculty member, nor am I aiming to be, and I have great respect for them. But I have been very fortunate to teach. When I moved into clinical research and had left law school, I knew I hadn't taken full advantage of the health law offering because, like I said, that wasn't originally my intent in transferring to that law school. And so I just thought, oh, I didn't study this. And since I very serendipitously, after I'd graduated and was practicing, fell into clinical research, thought if I went back and got, another degree, or I'd gone through doing the health law program, I mean, there would have been classes on all of this. So I, in my true little academic spirit, trudge over to my law school and talk to some of the health law folks and say, can I see some course list? And maybe I'll do all this and that and the other and add another set of initials to my name. And they're like, yeah, no, there's not really like courses in clinical trial compliance. Like, what are you talking about? You're silly. And I turned and looked at them and said, I can see the medical school from your office window. And and oh, by the way, that red dot that you see out of your other office window, that's Lilly. And then we all know Roche is on the north side of Indianapolis. That's their North American headquarters. So you're a top 10 health law program and you're telling me there's no value in having classes on how to conduct clinical trials and research ethics and life sciences compliance in this city? That seems kind of silly. I mean, that's the largest medical school in the United States. Like, that, right? And it's right there. Like, you park in their garage every day and walk over. And I was just flabbergasted. Like, I was like, would you what? Like, you mean we're all flying by the seat of our pants kind of and learning this as we go? What? And so that was really, I got into teaching because of that. And it was very much meant originally to be like, one class every now and then. And it has turned into now, I actually am the director over the Hall Center, which is our health law center within the IU McKinney School of Law. So I am the director over their experiential learning. So any type of health law internship or externship that our students would do for academic credit, I actually recruit our healthcare partners and clinical research partners that offer that to the students so that there are a ton of offerings. And then I personally pair them and do curriculum with them throughout at least their first experiential learning experience with me to really maximize their opportunities in health law and get them to understand the ethos of health law at large, right? Like what they're going to see in the industry. And it's always an eye opener. Like, for example, I'm probably one of the only externship directors because there's tons of experiential learning opportunities throughout law school in different areas of the law. I guarantee you I'm the only program where you have to go prove you have all your vaccinations and you've taken a flu shot and get all your, immunization records and get a TB test and so on, because you're going to be in a hospital or a potential clinical research facility. And that is actually so commonplace to all of us who are in it.
Right.
But to a law student, they're like, you want what information about me? Like, that's none of your business. And so it's just really honestly like getting them on board. And one of the huge things I've told them, because of course, I have students who are graduating this last spring in the middle of COVID. That's tough. How do you possibly make right with them that they don't get to have a huge graduation ceremony, let alone they're going to study for the bar exam while they're learning it remotely, which is just not how that has ever been taught or learned. And there's so much uncertainty. And, you have students who are going into another year of law school of uncertainty like this. So, many of them are like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm not going to get externships. I'm like, okay, first of all, healthcare didn't shut down. We got bigger during this. So I have more opportunities than ever. Even if they are remote, we will make them worth your while. And instead of focusing on what you think you're missing in each opportunity, right? Instead of saying, well, I had to work remote on this externship, so I didn't really get a full experience, but here's what I did. I mean, that's not a very confident sounding pitch to a future employer about your skill set. Instead, what you're going to say is, I did 3 externships in the middle of a pandemic. I was able to assist this healthcare entity in supporting the following projects from the comfort of my own home. Imagine what I could do if you let me on site. And that you can see like the light bulb goes on and they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, we're capitalizing on this. We are not going to be victims.
Right.
Okay. We're going to say, I still persisted. I still made law school work for me during a global pandemic. What do you think I can do when we're not all freaking out about COVID? And I think that's so part of what our clinical research ethos has to be too, right? And what healthcare has to be saying in this moment.
Sure.
Because otherwise, with all the other variables we were talking about earlier, it'd be pretty easy to get cynical, lost, jaded, right? But that's one of those big deals. I mean, I think this is, we'll be able to look back 10, 15, 20 years from now and say, like, I was doing clinical trial work in the time of COVID research. I was helping clients move into decentralized trials for the first time in the middle of a global pandemic. I mean, I was writing, I remember writing emergent home visit SOPs and workflows for clients last spring and thinking, I could never have dreamed I would have been writing this. I thought I'd be so excited to be writing it. And now I'm just freaking out because I'm not sure what it should say because it's not something that's been done enough that I could research it. Right. And go like, this is where they went right. This is where they went wrong. And you know what? I got to do it and I got to do it today.
Right. Right.
And so it was just this like mind blowing time. But I think it can be, like you said, we're all in this together. It can be super collaborative. I mean, it's made us have to talk to one another a little more. Right.
Sure.
And learn what we're all doing and take in each other's ideas more and collaborate a bit more. So, and I hope that's a continued, because we have to work more for that collaboration because we are all at home and whatnot. Maybe then that will be more meaningful and it will last a bit longer is my hope. If that makes any cheesy sense there. I just want everyone to get along.
Yeah. No, that makes that. No, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, it's so much uncharted territory. I mean, it does. It's got to be collaborative. I mean, and it's encouraging. Even just conversations like this, I think, are encouraging. Where if we can speak to the greater community and sort of get more and more buy-in from everybody else.
I completely and to hear what other people are doing. I mean, I've always been a sponge and someone who truly appreciates hearing lots of different ideas. I can't promise I'm going to agree with all of them. I can't promise I'm going to use all of them or that they work for me or my clientele or my needs, however you want to put that. But I definitely want to hear about it. And now more than ever is a time of great conscious active listening. And if we can truly do that, we could turn this into something amazing. But I also, it's that double-edged sword, right? It could also be a dumpster fire. And that's a really narrow line between those two. And that's scary. That's really, really scary.
It is.
And I think there's an ethos to it too. Like, how do we support the folks who are boots on the ground doing all of this? I mean, it's easy for me to posit all these pretty ideas from my corner office at home. I'm not the one who's at, an ICU at a trauma 1 level center dealing with COVID patients and being exposed all day. I might have some very, very different views on some of these issues and how it should proceed. And so, that's where I'm like, man, we all have to be listening. And we all have to be absorbing what we're hearing and being willing to talk to folks who might not necessarily, be 100% aligned with everything we view and feel. But that's about the only way I see us getting through this in one piece in the upright position, right?
Yeah, no, I could not agree more.
So now that I'm done with my big soapbox.
Well, so yeah, let's go backwards after we've solved all the problems, right?
All the real problems, clearly, right? If everyone was listening to me, I'm totally kidding. I'm not like that. I promise.
It's okay. I think our listeners will understand. So yeah, but going backwards, so how did you even end up in clinical research? What led you down the path?
Right. So I ended up going to this killer great law school that everyone is there to do health law. And people are looking at me like, so let me get this straight. Both of your biological parents are attorneys. They met because one was getting a master's in public health while the other was going to medical school and had those full robust careers before then both going back to law school in their late 40s, early 50s when I was in high school and pursuing further healthcare jobs like chief medical officer, quality, compliance, and you're going to go to law school and you're not going to do healthcare or anything related to it at a top health law school. I'm sorry, what? Like, were you dropped on your head? And so I heard this over and over and over and over in law school. And I'm like, no, what I was focused on was international human rights law. I had a very unique opportunity to begin studying abroad very early. My parents, despite us being in rural Oklahoma, were very open to learning. I was like learning Spanish at 2. I mean, they were just all about different cultures. And my father's parents traveled the world. They made a huge effort to go see, all the greats, right? The Paris, the London, but also the places that you never hear about, right? And it was such a part of their lives to give back to their community, to be involved, to take care of individuals who didn't, have a voice all in their own quite yet, and give them that voice. And that just transcended to me all that healthcare work and frankly, anything I was going to do, right? Here I am in the middle of a very poor town. I'm the privileged kid of a physician who's doing well and can afford to throw me in a private school. Man, I'm the picture of white privilege. I got to get back. That is what the universe needs from me. That is what they're asking for me. And is frankly what I have to do. I will not have lived my life without it. And so because I was studying abroad at such a young age and in high school, going places as far flung as even Russia, I just began to see all these different cultures, right? And it became very clear to me how good I had it, not just personally, but frankly, as a country, right? And as an individual. And I was really interested. I had gone to college, was slightly entertaining the idea of medical school, took a lot of science classes, realized pretty quickly that that was something I could do, but it might not be where my ultimate passion and best and highest talent was. And I'd always had all these writing and speaking skills, which was pretty rare for someone who was otherwise in the sciences, right? You're supposed to be like nerdy and super awkward and unable to socialize and so on. And so, I got really pointed out for having these skills and being able to like write a 5-paragraph essay in my sleep. And I was real sick in college one semester. And my dad said to me, if you still think you want to do this med school thing, you can't let your GPA tank. So this is not the semester we're going to take, OCHIM, right? This is a semester we're going to get all your other requirements. Go take a bunch of English classes. Go take a bunch of foreign language classes, Edie. That'll be easy. We can get your health back on track. And, it won't tank your GPA, and then you can go back to business as usual. Well, the problem was I didn't want to go back. That semester was some of the best grades I'd ever made while I was actually having the most fun I'd ever had in my classes. So I was very like, oh boy, okay. So I got to go home and tell my, 18 initial father that I'm going to be a creative writing major in college. And that's going to be an awesome conversation. And because of that, I leaned toward journalism and PR because those are ways you could use some of those skill sets and make money. And because of that, I started to actually, as I was traveling, pay more attention to journalism and the folks who were reporting some of these human rights atrocities. And they were then targeted because often your major news networks internationally wouldn't go into war-torn areas. They would contract with the little guy who was willing to go in and would get able to follow, a certain group, right, that was protesting and get that frontline coverage. It also put that contracted individual at risk. And I did this incredible internship in college overseas that led to then me realizing this is it. This is my passion. I got to devote everything I've got to human rights and making the world a better place and taking care of the individuals out there who are trying to do right by the world and giving them a voice. And so that was my whole mission. That was what I was going to law school. I'd worked before I'd gone back. It was my whole purpose. And this particular school, IU McKinney, had a very strong, still does, program in international human rights law. So, and it worked. It was great. I got to present at the United Nations twice before I left law school. Holy moly. I got to do internships in, Zambia. And so this was an incredible opportunity. I also graduated in the middle of a massive economic recession in 2008. And even my friends who were in the top 1% of our class had their job offers handed back to them because nobody was hiring. And so now you've done everything you're supposed to do. You've traveled the world. You've gotten all the accolades on your resume. You're thinking you're pretty hot stuff. You passed the bar exam and you're like, so I'm going to work retail, maybe bartend on the side. That sounds pretty cool. Glad I made the Honor Society. And so suffice to say, it was just a super tough time. And a colleague came to me and said, who had been all about health law and frankly had gotten involved in IRB compliance at IU and was in the HRPP as, at the time, an assistant director for the IRB system, which at IU is quite large because they support not just IU and all of their partners, but most of the city, frankly. And so she comes to me and says, I've got a project for you. It's going to be a contract job. I had just accepted an Air Force JAG Corps offer because I'm like, well, they're offering jobs. It's a pretty, highly regarded job. It would get me international. I'd see some things. I'd do some things. And when my 4 years is up, maybe the market will be different and I can try this again. I got to get a job. And she's like, yeah. I know you leave in 9 months for that. And that's super cool. But I have an IRB consultant contract. And I know that's not entirely your cup of tea. I also know you can do it. Compliance is your cup of tea. You have the skill set. You've gone to the United Nations and called out foreign countries for not complying with the ICCPR. I think you've got the kahunas to do this. And I can bring you up to speed. We'll give you a deep dive into the regulatory matter. I just need to know, would you be interested? It's a 9-month contract, so it's perfect timing for when you leave for the JAG Corps. Everyone knows you're leaving, so it's not like you'll ruin your rep by walking out or anything. Would you be interested? So I was actually an IRB consultant before I knew what an IRB stood for or what it entirely did. And I entered the university in a very different way because I was a contract employee. There was no formalities of moving up the food chain or trying to like get ahead or playing politics. It was, this is a 9-month contract. I'm going to do right by my friend. This is way better than bartending in retail. And then I'm going to take off in 9 months. And so it became almost like a game in that 9 months. I don't want to air out anybody's dirty laundry, although it's public. IU just had a tense time, we'll say, with the federal government. There was some whistleblowing activity and some things that just simply needed to be remedied and overhauled, and they were successfully. But it was a very intense time. They needed outside consultants to do that. We've all been through a time like that. And so it almost became like an inside joke that my bosses would be like, got this really particularly difficult situation, kid glove, sensitive, who wants to draw the short straw and try to deal with this? And I'd be like, I will. Like, that's okay. Like, even if it's awful, I'm gone in a few months anyway. And I'd resolve it pretty quickly and come back and be like, okay, well, like, I fixed that for you, Brad. What can I do next? And they're like, no way. And then it was like, well, let's give her something harder. Let's see if she can handle this. This will take you a whole month. And I'd come back a week later and be like, well, I went ahead and got that done for you. Did you have something else you want me to do? And so it just became almost being treated like a consultant within this particular situation. And at the end of the 9 months, I got offered a job and I stayed. I ended up staying at IU for almost 10 years. And long gone was the Air Force JAG Corps, and certainly not long gone that human rights background or that international love of taking care of people, but then was born Edye, the clinical research compliance queen, right? And I had the unique opportunity because I continued to work with many of the same people that I'd worked with in that contract capacity. They utilized me almost like a consultant throughout the HRPP. So I started in IRB, started moving more into quality assurance and clinical research compliance and the auditing pieces that come with that. That very organically moved us into research integrity and misconduct issues, as well as statewide IRB projects and conflicts of interest that came with that, and all of the training, of course, that comes with all these different areas. And then I moved into the IU Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center. And it was me needing and knowing I needed to have some site level experience, but also knowing that the Lilly and Roche, in my backyard, and even the Covances and other great CROs of the world that are located here, they weren't going to take someone who was viewed as somewhat the enemy, if we will, right? Like I was viewed as the IRB person, the misconduct police. They're not going to take you with open arms, for starters, as well as I didn't have the site experience. That was an accurate statement. I hadn't done that. I thought I did, right? I'd worked with sites endlessly, but I hadn't really been on that side of the fence. And I knew I needed it. I was interested in it. So the Cancer Center was in the midst of creating a quality and compliance manager position because they had all the moving parts, but they didn't have them all connected, right? Like under one umbrella that was truly an A to Z quality and compliance officer for all the research that was happening. And frankly, they'd gotten really big really fast. I mean, that Cancer Center was only open and unveiled 12 years ago, and that's counting from today. And I left them in 2017. So you're talking about, just a handful of years before that, their in-house clinical trials office was a handful of people, and now it's over 100. I mean, it was fast growth. So I went over there and did that for a few years. Loved it. Fell in love all over again with the industry, honestly, and found myself loving site work just as much, if not almost more, than the HRPP work. And just realized, okay, eventually my run at IU is going to hit a ceiling. I need to get ready for that next step. And what I've loved about my career is that I've had this incredible opportunity to be utilized so many different ways on so many different projects. And it's expanded my breadth and my bandwidth. And it's also being in an age where I know myself well enough, to know what works and know what doesn't for me personally. I got to be engaged. I got to be constantly challenged. If you give me same old,
sure,
I'm done.
Sure.
I'm gone. I'm not saying that's positive. I'm not saying that's not something I should do more on, but I know myself well enough to be honest about it. And so I'm like, okay, consulting is it. And it was interesting. As I went out looking for firms, I really thought the what I would call silver stocking firms, right? Like the heavy hitters out there that everyone knows the names of in healthcare and clinical trial compliance and research consulting would be like, ooh, because of course we always think highly of ourselves, right? And I was like a unicorn they didn't know what to do with, because they're like, so you're an attorney. But you're not at a firm. Nope. But you're an attorney. But you weren't in general counsel's office. Nope. But you're an attorney with an ethics background, and you're in clinical research operations, but you're not like a nurse or a doctor. Nope. And you could tell it was, again, the Sheldon broken face, right? Like, what do we do with you? And, that plus I admittedly wasn't bringing a client book. It was going to take a little bit of time to build one. They pretty much looked at me and said, we either don't know what to do with you, we don't have a role open for you, come back when you have a client book. I actually had one tell me, you should go to a firm and do the partner track and come back in about 10 years. And I was like, no. And it was kind of, it was a kick to the teeth, because it was like, oh, you're not this hot commodity you thought you were. And so it was very, again, serendipitous, as most of my career has been, and I'm so very grateful for it, that I knew of First Class Solutions, the current firm that I am with, through other compliance professionals, both in my space and in what I would call the clinical compliance, non-research, like chief medical officers and folks who are in the quality department and do case management and, medical record departments, et cetera. And First Class just continued to came up, right? And they'd been around since 1988. They weren't new. They obviously have, a really sturdy base underneath them. It was a couple who founded them. And they really started out heavily in healthcare billing and revenue cycle management, and still very much are in that space. But of course, that space grew and changed as we came into ICD-9 and 10 and coding and compliance and all the implications that has. Of course, in the 90s and early 2000s, you have privacy and security blowing up. So that becomes a huge issue in healthcare. And they're in the midst of building, health information management software. And I'm like, wow, this is this incredible firm. And their client book is filled with people who do research. And I'm like, I wonder if one of their co-founders would talk to me, right? Just 30 minutes, 45 minutes on the phone, mentor a poor lost soul. Have pity on me. Come on, I'm trying over here, right? And so I asked for an intro, and I received one. It was to their chief operating officer and co-founder, Rose Dunn, who is now my boss, and got on the phone with her. And she's a very straightforward, she will tell you the truth, which I so appreciate about her. And so we talked through what they were about, and we talked through what I've done, where I've been. She asked some pretty pointed questions, because she doesn't mince words. And I just asked her, very point blank, am I crazy? Have I lost my darn mind thinking that I can do this, right? That I can pull this off? Is there not a demand for the supply that I feel like I bring to the market? And I tell you what, at the end of that call, Brad, I had a job. And she said, no, you are spot on point. You're exactly the energy I'm looking for if I was ever going to get into research. We have the client book. They just need to know we offer these services now. So let's sit down and talk about what the heck your services are going to be, because I'm not a subject matter expert, but you are. And you're going to do not only consulting, but you're also going to, oversee and build the line, right? And help me make decisions about how to make this offering. And of course, we set it up in a way that was super high risk, high reward for both of us, a lot of safety net there. And it just took off. I couldn't dream in, 3 years, which is almost to the date, right? Because September 2017 is when I officially onboarded with First Class. I could not have dreamed in 3 years. I could have done as much as we've done. We're dropping educational models with ClinBiz. We have partners like Corlexia Clinical Services. We're working with, any and every client you can imagine across the clinical trial life cycle out there. in these unique areas. And I'm even now in a position where I'm bringing in, more subcontractors than I can count, right? Because like I was saying to you earlier, I'm having to almost delay clients, which is just, I just couldn't be more grateful. I'm getting to do everything I love doing. I'm getting to use what I feel are my strengths. My firm's bringing up the weaknesses, right? And do something that's so meaningful in a time that really needs it more than ever. To know that we were building this, 3 years before we could have ever anticipated being in a COVID world.
Sure.
Holy moly. I'm so glad that the timing struck the way it did. If we had to have a global pandemic, right? And so that's it. And it's, a bit long-winded. I don't hesitate to use words, but it was just this unique entry and has continued to be this really unique journey. And I think it helps that I can talk to my clients from a personal pivot point and tell them, like, you kidding? Do you know how many times I've pivoted in my own short career and how many more times I expect to, frankly? And so, approaching with a bit of a different environment or a different approach or a different background of experience and not being someone who said, oh, I'm going to law school. Oh, I'm going to be a clinical trial professional. No, this was all not in the master plan, not even remotely. And yet you can tell I'm excited and passionate about what I do. And I do think it's a way to give back to the universe at large. And I do still think it honors those principles, right, that I loved so very much about international human rights law, I wanted to work on, and put you in a position to actually remedy the shortcomings you see in the industry, because you're coming at it from that perspective. That was always what I wanted to do. I just couldn't have ever dreamed I would do it here or quite like this. So I think that's it. I think that's, and I think everyone, it's funny how many people I run into who tell me they have a uniquely serendipitous or accidental compliance professional story. I think there's even a book that Roy Snell put out where he uses the title of The Accidental Compliance Professional. I think it's actually very endemic in our ecosystem, because often your organization says to you, hey, we're going to move in this direction. We're going to need you to catch up, Brad. And now this job is going to include this and this too, right? And so you get put into these moments. Maybe you were already in clinical research operations, but suddenly, instead of just being over the regulatory team, you're also over the auditing team. Like, surprise, you're now a QA professional. And so because that just happens in healthcare, it's part of how we even make our assignments and assign management and leadership, which whole nother topic for another day I disagree with fundamentally, but it is how it takes place. And because of it, I think there's actually more of us that were probably somewhat accidental or serendipitous, as I like to say, than weren't.
Sure.
Right? I don't know that many people who were like, oh my gosh, I know when I grow up, I'm going to be. Like, if my kid says that to me instead of I want to be a fireman, mommy, or I want to be a policeman, I would be like, you want to what?
Right.
You know what mommy does? Like, wow. So that was it. That was how I got in. And it's been a blast. It's been an absolute blast. So yeah.
Very good. Yeah, no, I hear it from almost everyone I talk to, just the sort of accidental fall into the clinical research world. But then people, they do find they have a passion for it. And ultimately that's what it's about,
Yep. Well, it's about the skill set. If you've done compliance in any area, you have a certain skill set and enjoyed it, right? And want to continue to it. Then you can pivot, right? And there's a lot of different lesser recognized areas or depths in compliance that frankly transfer over. And people are always like, yeah, but you're not clinically trained. I would say that works to my advantage. Because I'm not going to get caught up in the clinical details and try to make a clinical argument. I am going to think the way your regulators think. And I am going to tell you how they're going to look at this situation. And I'm going to be able to give you the worst case scenario of what an auditor is going to say to you, so that then we can backtrack and go, how do we never let that happen? How do we put everything in place? And I think that, for clinical professionals to do what they do, even just in clinical care, let alone in research and in some of the really tough areas of research like oncology, there does have to be a certain resilience and optimism in their personalities. We know there's some aggressive overtones, right? And I mean that in a positive, right? You want your physician to be aggressive about your care if you have cancer, or as I call it, stage 4 scary. But that doesn't always meld really well with an auditor or a regulatory
Sure.
infrastructure, because it comes off as, oh, so you're above it. Oh, you think the rules don't apply to you, as opposed to, no, I'm just trying to be aggressive and give my patient every option to live.
Sure.
Right. And so I think that that's where my background is actually that unicorn uniqueness of, I can see the argument they're making, but I'm thinking bigger picture. I'm thinking of the other 699 clinical trials your organization has open, and how if you mess this one up, they could all get shut down at once. And then not just you telling one patient they're ineligible. Unfortunately, now every physician is walking into every patient room telling all of them that their treatment has to be suspended temporarily, if not permanently. I know you don't want that. So let's start from the top. And I don't mean that to paint a doctor in a bad light at all. I mean, good heavens, I have how many in my family? I have the greatest respect. It's more of, hey, I'm here for you. Okay. Let's make this work. Like, and let's approach it instead of, well, what will they allow me to do? Or how far do I have to push the boundaries to get my way? Let's approach it from, okay, tell me what your actual objective is. Take all the blinders off and all the regulatory constrictions out of the way. Just tell me in plain speak. What do you want to do? You want to enroll this patient. Okay. Why? Because I think that they could derive therapeutic benefit, and, or I think that they would be a perfect, person for this. Okay. Why don't they fit the eligibility criteria? Well, this one lab value is out of sync. Okay. Is this something we could change the protocol for? And start backing up a root cause analysis that still gets you to your goal, still follows all the rules, still, of course, protects safety, but is actually a conversation with a strategic plan, right, of how you're going to do it, instead of, well, what will they let me do?
Right,
okay, well, let's just do that, right? Or let's just take the hit and enroll the ineligible patient and ask for forgiveness later. You know what I mean? Like, this creates an environment where there's no strife. There's got to be a way to do this. There has to be a way. I mean, unless we're truly trying to do something nefarious, there's got to be a way to do this, and we're going to figure it out, and then we're going to pitch it, and we're going to move forward. And so it's, it's just a unique background to have in that space. And so, yeah, it's a blast. I love it. I can't say enough about how much fun we've had at First Class moving into this space, and starting to kind of meld projects together. And like I said, getting to bring in different subs in the area and starting to work with all different types of clients. Some you could have expected, some you're like, oh, I have a market for that.
Right.
Whoa. And then, of course, doing it in COVID, I mean, I'm making my own capitalization argument, right? Like I was making for my students of we're doing it. We're figuring it out. And it's, I don't see it slowing down anytime soon, which is fantastic. Because I just, again, I couldn't imagine having this skill set and this desire and not sharing it with anyone and everyone who could truly make use of it.
I think your energy comes through and your passion comes through for sure. So we're getting a little long on time. I'd love to.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, I'd love to have you come back on and do some more. Yeah, so in the meantime, tell people where they can find you.
Absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn. You'll find me under Edye Edens. I was going to say Edye Edens. If you look that up, it's literally LinkedIn /Edye Edens. That is my go-to. You can also look me up on our company website, which is firstclasssolutions, plural.com. So firstclasssolutions.com. And then my email. So that's my first name, Edye, period, last name, Edens, and that's at firstclasssolutions.com.
And we'll make sure we post that on the show notes so everyone will have access. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, would love to hear from folks. And thank you so much for this. And let me know. Happy to come back and chat, do a deep dive in any one of the 500 topics.
I think, we've got a lot more we could cover just from this conversation alone. So yeah, we'll set something up. And again, I thank you for coming on.
Of course, absolutely. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Edye.
Bye-bye.
As always, thank you for listening to the Note to File podcast. Please check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for full episode transcripts, show notes, and contact information for our guests. Thanks again.